to us and to all joyous and suffering beings everywhere. So we're about to take up the last third of the Gita. Oh, good evening, Swayam.
Good
Namaste.
evening. Namaste. Namaste, everybody.
We're about to take up the last third of the Gita. There is a school of thought. This is subscribed to by Brother Dhruva, who you all know from his talks and doing pujas for us and so on, who's quite a Gita scholar. He reads and speaks Sanskrit. He reads and speaks Bengali and has long experience in studying the Gita. So there is a body of opinion supported by some scholars that the last third of the Gita was not spoken on the battlefield, that it was added by Krishna talking to Arjuna after the Battle of Kurukshetra. Now, I don't suppose it makes a lot of difference, but you will notice a bit of a difference in tone. The scholarship that supports this view does this by studying the Sanskrit in which these last chapters are written, contrasted with the Sanskrit in which the earlier chapters are written. So we'll, with just that little side note in mind, to explain why there's a little difference in tone in the relationship between Arjuna and Krishna. So we're going to take up something that you can say is a bit technical, but it is absolutely crucial to understanding Krishna's frame of reference and the Sankhya point of view from which he speaks. The title is Chapter 13, The Field and Its Knower. Arjuna. And now Krishna, and this is Dhruva says it's very hard to imagine Arjuna asking this question on the battlefield. Arjuna, and now Krishna, I wish to learn about Prakriti and Brahman, the field and the knower of the field. What is knowledge? What is it that has to be known? Sri Krishna. Now, for any of you who want to really embody what's in the Gita, I suggest carefully studying this chapter because it allows you to have a different attitude toward the body. It goes back, if you will, to what Sri Krishna says in chapter 2. Sri Krishna, this body is called the field because a man sows seeds of action in it and reaps their fruits. Wise men say that the knower of the field is he who watches what takes place within this body. In other words, the witness, and now that the witness awareness is separate from the everyday consciousness, wise men say that the knower of this field, the knower of the field, the body, is he who watches what takes place within this body. And then Krishna identifies himself as that witness consciousness. This is what I'm saying. If we begin to really internalize, assimilate, as Sri Ramakrishna says, this idea that the body is something that is happening in my presence, the body and its actions, everything associated with it, thoughts, feelings, perceptions, actions, and their fruits. This is all something that's happening in my presence. But the me of me is the divine presence, Tattvamasi, thou art that. So Krishna says, recognize me as the knower, recognize me as the knower of the field in every body, everybody. I regard discrimination between field and knower as the highest kind of knowledge. I'm just pausing to let that sink in. I regard discrimination between field and knower as the highest kind of knowledge. So when you release your identification with the field and transfer your identification to the knower, you're manifesting what Krishna calls the highest kind of knowledge. Now listen, and I will tell you briefly what the field is, its nature, modifications, and origin. So he's going to expand a great deal on what he said in chapter 2 about the body, in which he describes it as a garment that we take on and put off, and so on and so forth. I will tell you briefly what the field is, its nature, modifications, and origin. I will tell you also who the knower is and what are his powers. The sages have expressed these truths variously in many hymns and in aphorisms on the nature of Brahman, subtly reasoned and convincing in their arguments. And by this, he's referring to the Upanishads. This is, and other scripture, but remember, Krishna predates a lot of the stuff that came later, like Shankaracharya, Madhvacharya, and so on. So the sages have expressed these truths, the truths I'm going to tell you, variously in many hymns and in aphorisms on the nature of Brahman, the Mahavakyas he's speaking of specifically, and in general, there are more than just the 4 Mahavakyas, but he's speaking of those. The aphorisms on the nature of Brahman, subtly reasoned and convincing in their arguments. Now, as I said, if you want to understand Sankhya, this is where you would study what is the Sankhya point of view. First, Prakriti, which is the cosmos, in cause unseen and visible feature. Okay, so Prakriti, which is the cosmos, in cause unseen and visible feature, in other words, the manifest and unmanifest. Intellect, which in the little diagram in the back of the Gita, of Swami Prabhupananda's Gita, is referred to as buddhi. Intellect, ego, ahamkara, the eye maker. There is only one. Our sense of individual being is a reflection in what he's about to speak of next. So buddhi, the discriminative power, ego, the ahamkara, oh, this is who is discriminating, and then this thing that we are wearing, earth, water, and ether, air, and fire. Man's 10 organs of knowing and doing, man's mind also. So now these are the reflectors. This is what reflects buddhi and ahamkara and gives us a sense of individual being. So though they are, so first, Prakriti. which can be thought of also as Brahman and Shakti, the unseen and the visible feature, which is also called Mahat, the great cause, in that diagram that I mentioned at the back of the book. Intellect, buddhi, ego, ahamkara, and then first the subtle elements, and this is all, everything he's listing so far is the subtle. Earth, water, and ether, air and fire, man's 10 organs of knowing and doing, man's mind also, the 5 sense objects, sound in its essence, this is what I meant about subtle, sound in its essence of aspect, seeing, essence of odor, of touch, and of tasting, the 5 senses. And then their manifestations in the feelings, thoughts, and perceptions. Hate and desire, and pain and pleasure. Consciousness, lastly. Now, the consciousness, I've been using the word awareness for this aspect, to differentiate it between the universal consciousness and our individual awareness. So I say this not to correct Sri Krishna, but just to let you know why I have been using that in place of the word that is used here as consciousness. Our individual awareness, consciousness. Lastly, and resolution. This is very, very important in understanding how the mind works. It is by making the various resolutions, that is to say, making decisions about how things are, that we project the reality that we experience. So this is what he means by resolution. That ability to take what is available to us as memory, as sense impressions, as mental impressions, and form that through knowing name and form. So this is, we form resolutions about this and say, this is the way it is. And this is why it's said, anyone who says, I know how it is bound to be mistaken, because they're projecting only their own reality, not the reality, which is inexpressible. As Robert Frost in his shortest poem said, this is quite famous, Robert Frost's shortest poem. We dance around in a ring and suppose the secret sits in the middle and knows. So here we have this list ending with resolution. These with their sum, which is blent in the body, these make the field with its limits and changes. And notice limits, as Swami Vivekananda said, we are infinite dreamers, dreaming finite dreams. That's what Krishna means by limits. And changes, as was pointed out by Gareth Young on Sunday, change is the nature of reality. It is the very nature of the reality that the field experiences. Therefore, and now comes the instruction about how to use all of this knowledge as a spiritual being, as a spiritual aspirant. Therefore, I tell you, be humble, be harmless, have no pretension, In other words, this idea of that you know beyond what you can assert for a certainty for yourself. Have no pretension. Swami Vivekananda said, a man is a fool who swallows his own spit. And that aphorism means we're foolish if we believe that what we say about reality is the truth. Therefore, I tell you, be humble, be harmless, have no pretension, be upright, forbearing. What does upright mean? Upright means truthful. Upright means someone who can be depended upon. It's almost like something out of the Boy Scout oath, you know. Be upright, forbearing, serve your teacher in true obedience. What does it mean to serve your teacher in true obedience? To do your very best to fulfill the instructions that you were given by the teacher. It doesn't mean, you know, waiting on them hand and foot, although if you have that privilege for some period of time to actually serve your teacher physically, that's a great boon. But to serve your teacher in true obedience is to do your best to follow the instructions that they gave you. Be upright, forbearing, and Sri Ramakrishna said, titiksha or forbearance is the true hallmark of a spiritual devotee, of a spiritual aspirant. The fact that they don't react to things. They take the measure of what's happening and act appropriately, or not react. They're forbearing. Serve your teacher in true obedience, keeping the mind and the body in cleanness. And if you want a definition of what this means, just go to the niyamas in Yoga Sutras. It gives a very good explanation of what this kind of purity is meant. Of course, it means keeping the body clean, but it's a very nice summary in the book How to Know God, and also Swami Vivekananda's Raja Yoga. Keep the mind and the body in cleanness, tranquil, steadfast, master of ego. In other words, not taking this reflection of the ahamkara as a truth, rather than letting that reflection govern you, and you think that's the truth of who you are. No, you are the master of the ego. Notice he doesn't say anything about destroying the ego. It's not a question of destroying the ego. It's a question of mastery. Tranquil, steadfast, master of ego, standing apart from the things of the senses, free from self, the small self, this sense of individuality, aware of the weakness and mortal nature and bondage to birth and suffering, birth, age, suffering, dying. Notice these are exactly the things that the Buddha pointed to. Birth, age, suffering, dying. To nothing be slave, nor desire possession of man-child or wife, or home, or of household. And does that mean you shouldn't have a child or a wife or a home or a household? No. It means if you do, if that is your swadharma and your karma, what does he say about it? To nothing be slave. So don't have those things be, you're not a slave to these things. You behave appropriately. You take care of your family, your home, your household, and you practice mental renunciation of not desiring possession of man, child, or wife, or home, or of household. So this is, people get very confused about this. Does that mean I shouldn't get married? Does this mean I shouldn't have a child? Does this mean I shouldn't have a house or anything? No. It simply means if that is your swadharma, if that is your karma, that you do have those things, don't be a slave to them. Don't, you can see it, particularly you can see it in people who are aging, who could be turning their attention to liberation, to moksha. And instead they're absolutely entranced with their grandchildren. And they spend most of their time thinking about, playing with, buying things for, taking care of their grandchildren. Now again, is that a bad thing? No, it's just not making the use of that time that they might if they weren't allowing themselves to be a slave to this emotional attachment. And you see it so much. It's just, people just allow themselves to be drawn into this. So Krishna says, doesn't say don't have. He says, don't be a slave to it. Don't be a slave to it. It's a world of difference. Calmly encounter the painful, the pleasant. Hard to do. Hard to do. To calmly encounter the painful and the pleasant, not to get hypnotized by the pleasant things and feel this great aversion to the unpleasant, the painful. Calmly encounter the painful, the pleasant. It's a practice. It's something that you work on for years and years and years. How do you work on it? By practicing being that witness self and seeing yourself having this aversion to the painful and this hypnotism leading toward addiction to the pleasant. So what does Krishna say? Replace all this with. Adore me only. And it can never be said often enough. Krishna does not mean that physical form that served as Arjuna's charioteer. Yes, you can worship that physical form as a baby, as an adult, as the king, all those things. Keeping in mind that what this is just an image, something that you can hold in mind, because the truth of his being is beyond our mind's compass. So adore me only with heart undistracted. If you're not a slave to these other things, then your heart can be undistracted. Your heart, your mind may do this, that, the other thing. No, your heart is undistracted. Okay, he's headed off in another direction here. So it's a good time to stop, I think. And yeah, it's almost 8:30. We've covered a lot of ground here about the field and its knower. And we've gotten to the point where Krishna has given us these detailed instructions about how to live what he's talking about. So any comments or questions, anything before we go on, that if anything's rattling around in your mind and you're thinking, well, what about this, or what does this actually mean, or how does this work? Now's the time to bring it up, please.
Brother Krishna?
Yes.
Reading this several times before, I've always felt like this was an explanation of Krishna was telling us how he was the divine and the watcher, and how he was explaining to us how we're also in the field experiencing him and being one with him as the witness in our own consciousness. Is that?
But that witness consciousness is the divine.
Mm-hmm.
As it says
kind of the non-duality part of it.
Yeah, well, you can even parse it dualistically, which is what Sankhya does.
Okay.
But it's like in the evening prayer that we say here, breaker of this world's chain, speech cannot hold thee nor mind, yet without thee we think not nor speak. Speech cannot hold thee nor mind, yet without thee we think not nor speak. So you're absolutely right that Krishna is emphasizing our identification with the witness, but the witness is not an artifact of the small self.
Right.
We have our daily ordinary consciousness that is an artifact of the small self. But this witness consciousness, when we're able to withdraw and watch ourselves, watch what's going on, that is actually the face of the divine presence. And so the more we identify with that, the more we're able to live out the instructions that Krishna just gave us. Because that witness awareness is a slave to nothing. It's an observer of all, non-judgmentally and absolutely, we're not paying attention to it most of the time. But it is paying attention 100% of the time, even when we're in deep, dreamless sleep. Is that clear?
Yes, that helps a lot. Thank you, Brother Chakra.
Good. Okay. I mean, I ask that question only because if something isn't clear, then we shouldn't go on. And thank you for what you said. And thank you for the question, which is just absolutely right on at this point. Anyone else? Anything?
Brother Shankara,
Yes, Swayam.
can you clarify a little bit what you meant by the mind can go here and there, but the heart remains where it is, or I forgot the exact words you said.
What is the nature of the mind? The nature of the mind is to be a reflection of the actions of the gunas. As Krishna tells us in chapter 3, our experiences through the five senses, through the 10 organs of knowing and our five senses, are nothing more than the gunas attaching themselves to gunas. This is something of the mind. The heart, most of us, because we don't do spiritual practice, most of us don't ever learn the secret of the heart. The heart is calm. It's steadfast. it doesn't change in any sense like the mind does. It changes, but very differently. If you want to know what I'm talking about in modern English, written by someone who really knows what she's talking about, read Jill Boltes Taylor, My Stroke of Insight. What happened was she had a massive stroke in her left hemisphere that took her mind and the personality associated with that mind totally offline. Didn't exist for her. And what she was left with was the heart, the right mind, which is a reflection of the heart, our right brain consciousness, right mind consciousness. I cannot recommend that book highly enough to any of you who want to understand this chapter of the field and the knower. It so beautifully explains. She's a neuroanatomist. I mean, Jill Bolte Taylor is a Harvard PhD neuroanatomist, but she's also a remarkable, creative human being. And she wrote a beautiful book called My Stroke of Insight. And the insight that she had was that there is this other aspect of our being, the heart. And within that, we can live what Krishna says, adore me only with heart undistracted, when we gain access to it. Of course, the mind comes roaring back. You know, it's always there. And it wants to insist on itself. It wants to insist on its primacy. It wants to insist that it knows what's what, and you don't know. You who are arguing with your mind. I think, Swayam, you've gotten a copy of Love Poems from God. Read Kabir's poem about the nag. And it is absolutely priceless about the quality and nature of the mind, as opposed to, as he develops it, as the poem develops, the nature of the heart. He calls the mind the nag. And he says, I'm so troubled by this nag. And he says, no, I'm not talking about my wife or my mother-in-law. They're both angels. I mean, this other thing that exists within me somehow, I don't remember the words of the poem, but it's one of Kabir's finest and funniest poems.
Thank you, Guruji.
The mind is changing constantly and rapidly in response to just everything that goes on. And so when we practice our spiritual disciplines, when we practice our meditation, our japa, whatever, we sink beneath that. We sink towards silence. And we can see it. It's like sitting at the bottom of a swimming pool and seeing all the people at the surface of the swimming pool splashing and swimming and so on. And you're down at the bottom of the pool and it's calm and it's quiet. This is what happens to us when we do our spiritual practices. We sink towards silence. And it changes our idea of ourselves and of the world that we live in when we discover that place. It changes us entirely. The mind will never be the same.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anything else? That was really good, Swayam. That was a really good question. Okay, if we're content to go on then. Adore me only with heart undistracted. Turn all your thought towards solitude, spurning the noise of the crowd, its fruitless commotion. That's that metaphor I just used of sitting at the bottom of a swimming pool and watching all of this going on above you. Turn all your thought towards solitude, spurning the noise of the crowd, its fruitless commotion. Strive without ceasing to know the Atman. And notice that Krishna doesn't say, know the Atman. No, he says, strive without ceasing to know the Atman. Seek this knowledge and comprehend clearly why you should seek it. And that's why I just recommended to every one of us to read that book, My Stroke of Insight, by Jill Bolte Taylor, because she, in explaining what she found when her left brain went offline, it's absolutely unavoidable that you will comprehend clearly why you should seek that. Of course, when I first read that book, I just jumped up and down. I said, this woman discovered all the things that are mentioned in Patanjali. She didn't know anything about Patanjali. She didn't know anything about the Yoga Sutra. She discovered it independently because of having a disciplined mind. And you talk about the witness consciousness. As she's having this stroke, she's observing herself having this massive stroke and thinking, how remarkable. What a wonderful thing for a neuroanatomist to be having this stroke so that I can see it and know it. It's really quite remarkable.
Brother Shankara?
Yes, dear.
I don't remember his name, but there's another neurologist. I don't know what department, but he had a similar experience where he lost his brain for some virus which was eating his nerves and all this.
Yes, the book is called Proof of Heaven.
Proof of Heaven.
Yeah, the book is called Proof of Heaven, and it's also worth our time for reading. He wasn't a neuroanatomist. He was but he was a neuroscientist.
A neuroscientist, okay.
Yeah, and a cardiologist. You can find the book Proof of Heaven. It's also worth your attention. But you're right, and what he finds is just as astounding. He even discovers Om. Didn't know anything about Om. It's
I think, yeah, we're talking about the same person because he goes into the sound, the Nada Yoga.
Yeah. He discovers it in the heart of the cosmos. Seek this knowledge and comprehend clearly why you should seek it. Such, it is said, are the roots of true wisdom. Ignorance merely is all that denies them. Okay. Sorry, my vision is compromised. Ignorance merely, such it is said, are the roots of true wisdom. The roots is what he's referring to. Such it is said is the roots of true wisdom. Ignorance merely is all that denies them. So now we're going to go ahead and he's going to describe what it is that we need to embody Sri Ramakrishna uses the word assimilate, what we need to embody in order to gain immortality, in order to become no longer slave to rebirth and death. Now I shall describe that, and it's a capital T. Now I shall describe that, which in Sanskrit is tat, as in tat tvamasi, that thou art. Now I shall describe that which has to be known in order that its knower may gain immortality. That Brahman, now it begins the description. That Brahman is beginningless, transcendent, eternal. Now, here's something for us to realize as we're reading this and studying this. Our finite minds cannot understand those words. We cannot understand beginningless. So it's just a gesture toward that which we are to know, so that when we encounter it, we can say, oh yes, this is what Krishna was talking about. When we have those inklings, when we have those experiences, that Brahman is beginningless, transcendent, eternal. He is said to be equally beyond what is and what is not. Again, these are not things that we will be able to understand as we sit here. This is beyond thought's compass, but it is something that we recognize when we've studied this and made it our own. We say, ah, that's what Krishna meant. There's something beyond what is and is not. What is and is not? The duality. There is something beyond the duality. Everywhere are his hands, eyes, feet, his heads, and his faces. This is almost a direct quote from the Upanishads. Everywhere are his hands, eyes, feet, his heads, and his faces. Now, if we go back to the chapter on Arjuna experiencing his universal form, this is described in that. Everywhere and in such profusion, such abundance, as to not be able to, not even begin to assimilate it. It's too much for Arjuna, and he retreats from it. Everywhere are his hands, his eyes, feet, his heads, and his faces. The whole world is his ear. He exists encompassing all things. Again, don't try to understand this intellectually. It's not something that we're going to be able to understand intellectually. But when you encounter this deeper reality as you sink towards silence in your spiritual practices, then you have you say, this is what Krishna was gesturing toward. This whole world is his ear. He exists encompassing all things, doing the task of each sense, yet himself devoid of the senses. What in the world can that possibly mean? We discover it in silence. This is what he means by seeking solitude and sinking into that silence. Standing apart, he sustains. He is free from the gunas, but feels them. This is that witness consciousness that I was talking about. standing apart. He sustains. Like I said, that witness consciousness is always there, even when we're in a coma, even when we're in dreamless sleep. It's always there, standing apart. He sustains. He is free from the gunas, but he feels them. He is within and without. He lives in the live and the lifeless. We begin to understand this when we understand from that deeper place that we are projecting all of this. We are creating our universe, and there seem to be things that are alive, and there seem to be things that are lifeless. In fact, it is all Brahman. So he is within and without. He lives in the live and the lifeless. Subtle beyond mind's grasp, finally he says it in so many words, subtle beyond mind's grasp, so near us, so utterly distant, undivided. Now, this is such an instruction to us. Undivided, he seems to divide into objects and creatures. This is what is meant in the Chandogya Upanishad when the cosmic mind says, I am one, I shall become many. According to the sages, Vasishta especially, Shankaracharya also, but Vasishta especially, nothing happened. There's no change in Brahman. The dream of existence began. It is Brahman's dream. And that's why it, in Brahman's dream is called Shakti, Maya, Mahamaya. And that's why it's so compelling and so convincing. Because it has all the power of Brahman within it, behind it. Undivided, he seems to divide into objects and creatures. Sending creation forth from himself, he upholds it and withdraws it. The day of Brahma, the night of Brahma. He upholds it and withdraws it. Light of all lights, he abides beyond our ignorant darkness. Knowledge, the one thing real we may study or know, the heart's dweller. And this is why we have to learn, if we wish to pursue this. We don't have to do it in any imperative or dogmatic sense. But if we wish to pursue this, we must learn to sink below the constantly changing mind. I'll go back to that metaphor of sitting at the bottom of a swimming pool. It's perfectly peaceful there. And you look up and you see all of what's going on, all the splashing, all the goings on. Knowledge, the one thing real we may study or know, the heart's dweller. That knowledge is Brahman itself. That is what it says. Brahman does not know. Brahman is knowledge itself. Brahman does not exist. Brahman is existence itself. Brahman does not love, or Brahman is not blissful. Brahman is love or bliss itself. what is the absolutely, if this is so, if this is what I just said is true, then everything that partakes of existence is ipso facto Brahman. Everything that can be known is ipso facto Brahman. All love, all bliss is ipso facto Brahman. Knowledge, the one thing real we may study or know, the heart's dweller. So Krishna is about to start his summary. We have some minutes left in the hour. Any comments, questions, anything? This is where we do this together. So please be forthcoming. Anything at all that you have as a reaction to this, as a question about this, as a comment you'd like to make for the benefit of us all, now is the time to do it.
Brother Shankar, I do have some confusion.
Yes, dear.
If all that exists is Brahman, and Brahman is also all that is love and bliss, then existence as we know it, I guess this is where the error comes in. It's not just bliss, there is also opposite of bliss. So how do we reconcile that all existence is Brahman and Brahman is bliss, but existence also has bliss and not bliss?
Because we get confused between the duality and the reality. If you wish to understand the nature of Maya, read Swami Vivekananda's collection of talks given in London. They're collected together under the title Jnana Yoga. And he explains how everything that we identify as negative, everything that we see as imperfect, is necessary, because there cannot be duality without both darkness and light. So there's suffering, we can look around us in the world right now. What do we see? It's god awful. There's no two ways about it. There's a great transformation underway. Shiva is at work. Yama is at work.
Brother Shankar?
Yeah, just a minute. Let me finish. So this cannot exist without its corollary, the light. But the light and the darkness, in that sense, are both apparitional. There is something beyond what is and is not. And that's where we find true love and true bliss. And I'm going to talk about this in the second talk given in September. The first talk is titled A Little Improvement. The second talk is, the title escapes me right now, but it's about the nature of love as in its divine, in its real expression. Oh, the title is Where There Is Love, Where There Is Love. So yes, Amrapali.
No, I think you pretty much answered. The question was that why is the need of, when you said there is duality and that's why we have the light and the dark. My question was, why is there need for the duality?
That's the question that absolutely cannot be answered, dear. Why is there need for it? It's Brahman's dream. It's Brahman's dream. It's not a question of need. But you can read what Swami Vivekananda says, how if we have the one, we must have the other. So there's the need for both if we're going to have both. But he says, go beyond both. Go beyond the what is and what is not. And this is what Krishna is talking about when we discover the being and the nature of the heart's dweller. So it's a very good question. And the reason I say it's such a good question is that Vivekananda spends, I think it's half a dozen talks, maybe more, maybe as many as 8 talks, hour-long talks, answering just exactly what you're asking. And these are very, for our minds, Margaret Noble, the woman who became Sister Nivedita, she fought with him hammer and tongs. She would stay after class and she would just absolutely go at him the way he used to go at Sri Ramakrishna. Prove this to me. Prove this to me. And of course, he couldn't prove it to her intellectually, but he was convincing enough about how she could learn the nature of this, that it was worth her effort to learn the nature of what he was talking about, so that she began to do the spiritual practices that he taught her. And she became one of his absolutely most, probably his most important disciple among the householders. So the need for it, as soon as Brahman says, I am one, I shall become many, everything that comes with manyness appears in the dream. And we're dreaming that dream. As Vivekananda said, we are infinite dreamers dreaming finite dreams. Each of us our own. It has common elements and there's a common thread. There's a universe we share, and then there's the universe we make for ourselves. And if you want to understand how this unwinds, how it finally comes to an end, read the last pages of Swami Vivekananda's Raja Yoga. He gives a poetic explanation of what happened to us, how we came to be this way, and how it ends. And it's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful explanation. But it's never anything, dear, that we're going to be able to intellectually understand. You remember I gave some talks about Don Juan Matus and his student, his apprentice, Carlos Castaneda. Castaneda was a very left-brain guy. He was working on his PhD at UCLA. And Don Juan Matus would tell him something about the nature of reality. And Castaneda would try to pin him down about, define your terms and so on. And Don Juan would lose his patience and say, Carlos, it's just a way of talking about it. You can't put it in words. You can only gesture toward it. And so that's what all this is. As I said, we discover the meaning of these words, not intellectually, but as we sink towards silence. And by sink towards silence, when we fully are in the presence of that silence, then all of this ends.
Yeah.
It's not
it is getting a little clearer. It is getting a little clearer. Even in the answer you said that God is not blissful, but it is bliss. God is not the lover, but it is love. I mean, it does explain. And so that is a way of seeing it. Maybe it's not a duality if you put it that way. It's all about love and the absence of love. So everything else is actually love. It's just the lack of an absence. And when we get
Well,
that,
all of the saints will tell us that behind the appearance is complete perfection. And this includes Vivekananda and Sri Ramakrishna, but Sri Ramakrishna can't be classified as a saint. He's beyond that. So anything else? This is wonderful. This is exactly what we should be doing, processing this.
Brother Chakra, I
Yes.
have one question. Going back a page when he brings up Atman,
Mhm.
is Atman part of the knower or part of the field?
No, Atman is the knower. It's a word equivalent with Brahman, but it appears in us as this witness consciousness.
Great, thank you.
So yes, it is the knower. Atman is the knower. The word Atman and Brahman are identical. It's just a way of talking about it as it appears in us individually, as it seems to appear in us individually. Really good question.
Thank you.
Brother Shankara,
Yes.
kind of going back to duality, it seems to me that duality is the game itself. Without duality, you're out of the game.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
it is the mechanism by which you work your way out of it. Is the thing. So without it, none of this really exists.
Exactly. Precisely.
The world in which
And so the thing for us to do is have some fun. Think of this as an adventure. It like, you know, if you want to learn to skateboard, you know darn good and well you're going to bang yourself up a little bit. You're going to make some mistakes. But if you persist, you become a really good skateboarder. And you can see some things online, some things on YouTube and so on about people doing things on skateboards. I remember so well my son learning to skateboard. And, you know, we provided him with all the proper equipment, the knee pads and the this and the that and that. And yet he'd come home banged up, of course. So but if we think of this as an adventure and the pleasure and the pain as just something, as Jesus said in his shortest instruction, his shortest logion in the Gospel of Thomas, be passers-by. The pain and the pleasure, just, okay, that's what happened. I'm passing by, I'm on to the next thing. The more we cling, as Gareth pointed out on Sunday, the more we cling, the more we get attached, we just get stuck. So you're absolutely right, Keith. You're absolutely right. This is the game. And that's why Sri Ramakrishna said to people, oh, you know, you can't talk to me about certain things because I'm out of the game. I scored too many points. There's a game called NAX, N-A-X, where if you score too many points, you're out of the game. So yes, Keith, you're absolutely right. And so we just jump in with both feet.
I wanted to make one more point.
Sure.
I listen to a lot of Ram Dass, and when talking about all the suffering you see in the world, right, how terrible it is, if you view things as we are all entities working out a certain level of karma to burn off to, of course, escape duality, you know, his thought about it, and I think it's a beautiful thought, is that a lot of the tragedy you see going on, especially when it's mass, you know, if we've decided to come here to work off a certain level of karma, you've decided to be there at this point in time to be a part of whatever's happening there that'll get you out of here at a certain level of karma you've burnt off, and you head to the next adventure. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. As the elders of the Lakota people say, you were born for this time. So the fact that we are part of this massive transformation that's going on, you're just exactly right, and Ram Dass is right. Exactly. We're here, and the thing for us to just get is we want to be here. Nobody made us do it. We wanted to be, because we are Brahman itself, wanted to become many. We became many. And so now we're one of the many. And we just have to keep in mind this is a dream. And the reason it is so compelling and so convincing and so powerful is that it is Brahman's dream. And we are that. That's why it's so hard for it to be corrective, for us to be corrective to change our momentum. Beautiful. Anything else, dears?
Oh, hey, Brother Shankara.
Yes, Liam.
Hey, I just had a comment about the line. I think you said it was Vivekananda who said, "A man is a fool who swallows his own spit."
Yep.
It reminds me of a book written by a gentleman named Nassim Nicholas Taleb called The Black Swan.
Mm-hmm.
And in this book, he has a line where he talks about, how can we know the future given the knowledge of the past, or more generally, how can we figure out properties of the infinite unknown based on the finite known? And then he gives an example to reinforce that assertion of like a turkey, like a Thanksgiving turkey. So for 340 or 64 days of the year, the farmer is feeding this turkey, right? So every day this turkey is expecting, oh, hey, here's the farmer, I'm going to be fed food. But then on, Thanksgiving Day, that expectation is completely inverted. In fact, not only is it not a valuable expectation based on past experience, but it actually is a negative because that turkey becomes the food. So I just, when thinking of that, just made me think of that whole line of like, yeah, right, like a lot of the basing what will happen next on the past can be a little dangerous, and sometimes not only might it not be of no value, could even be dangerous. Being.
Excuse me, I don't know what's happened.
Oh.
Janice, I'm in class. Sorry, I don't know what happened. My sister called and somehow iTunes started. Go figure. Sorry, Liam.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, I guess the point was just making is, like that whole of just relying on, what we know based on past experience, or what we know based on what we read could be, dangerous, like the Thanksgiving, just like that analogy that he used in that book really resonates with me in terms of thinking of how, these, this infinite unknown, it could, there's so many things that could happen that, my past experience would not be a useful precedent to contend with. I need to let go of those old beliefs and, be open to something new.
Absolutely. If we, this is the meaning, you correctly deduced the meaning of Vivekananda's remark. If we insist that we know how things are, if we believe what we say about the world and ourselves, then we're just preventing ourselves from moving on. Very well put, very well said.
Radha Shankara, Liam,
Yes, dear.
I'd like to share something.
Mhm.
One of the things, sometimes when you have a addiction or a attachment, you start, a friend of mine brought it to my notice that, you sometimes start identifying with it. It's like, I am that, because you
Mhm.
feel that the past experience is there, so it has to be that way. And so you are feeding it more and more every day
Yes.
by, I mean, even though intellectually and deep down, okay, by saying that, I won't smoke, I won't do this, you end up doing that because the universe, that's, one of those law of attraction or whatever they say, which has a more deeper meaning. But the point is that whatever you are putting attention to, mind goes, energy goes where the mind goes, kind of thing. So
No
what
question.
I liked what Liam said, and just wanted
Yes.
to share that
Yes.
if you identify with the past, you will stay where you are. And if
Yes.
it's that very difficult place where you have to open a crack a window kind of thing. Like Rumi says, love can enter through the cracks. What is that? He has one very beautiful saying that it's you. The light, the light enters through the cracks. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, if you remember the conversations between Don Juan Matus and Carlos Castaneda at one time, Castaneda asks Don Juan, well, you know who you are, don't you? And Don Juan answers, you bet I do not. If we think we know who we are, we're swallowing our own spit. Anything else, dears? This is perfect. All right. Well, we'll take it up next week with starting with now I have told you briefly what the field is. And so, all right. Oh, dearly beloved, a flower at your feet for each one who comes to your open door. A flower at your feet for each one who stands by your open door and says, come to me, offering to break this world's chain that binds us down to ignorance, suffering, and death. A flower at your feet for each one who takes the path that you have struck through this, your jungle world. Om, Amen. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace. Peace be unto us, and to all joyous and suffering beings everywhere. So good night all, until Saturday morning. That's our next opportunity to get together, if you will. And then Sunday's talk is, Saturday morning we study the book Realizing God. It's a collection of Swami Prabhavananda's talks. And then on Sunday, the talk will be, and it'll be the last talk until September. The talk's title is A Jnani's Response to Transformation. So, yes?
Thank you, Brother Shankara. This was
well, thank you, dears.
wonderful chapter.
Such a joy and a privilege to be with you. So, Jai Shri Guru Maharaj Ji Ki Jai, Durga, Durga, Durga. Go in Mother's loving and protective embrace. Until next time.
Until next time.
Hari Om.
Thank you, Hari Om. Good night, Brother Shankara, everybody.
Good night,
Thank you,
dears.
Brother Shankara. Good night.